Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have someone special with me, Dr. Swasti Rao, who's going to talk to us about what's happening in this world. This world, especially after the Ukraine war, has taken a dive, and everything seems to be changing. Alignments seem to be changing, and people seem to be talking a totally different language. She's an associate fellow at the Europe and Eurasia Center at the Manohar Parikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Good evening, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Adi. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I wanted to ask you, I've been reading your tweets and they're pretty intriguing. As a matter of fact, you've commented about very different things around the place. And that's why I said, okay, here's a person who's talking about different things. Let me see if I can round them all up into a discussion and try and understand what's happening with this world. To begin
Yeah.
with, Europe and Eurasia Center, your primary focus would obviously be, a lot to do with Ukraine as to seeing what's happening, the geopolitics opening there. This particular war has changed alignments. Wars have been there before, but this one has kind of changed alignments. It's changed narratives. It's changed everything. Why do you think that is taking place? Is Ukraine that important?
Well, I think the first thing is that Ukraine may or may not be that important. It depends on how you want to look at it, Adi. But what definitely is important is the profile of players that are involved in Ukraine. I think that is what makes it so global in its impact. Because if you know, I mean, I don't think we are going to get into the geopolitical reasons of why the war began, particularly. But whatever little I think everybody knows is that Ukraine is being supported by West, and when I say West, I mean Europe and NATO particularly. While on the other hand is Russia, who is basically trying to do this unprovoked, like rather unprovoked war in Ukraine for taking away a certain bit of Ukrainian territory that Russia alleges to be pro-Russian. So this is what is happening, and it is, I think, the scale of the people, the global actors that are involved, and the kind of money that is flowing there, which has actually made it a bit of a global war. Because what then happens when the big players in the world are involved in a war like this, and not just a simple war, but a protracted conflict like this? When I say protracted, I mean a very long, conflict. It has already been about 400 odd days of the war, by the way. Okay, and it shows no signs for baiting. So you can expect that 2023 will also be gone in the war, and by the end of 2023, I suppose there would be some direction. But let's see. So 2 years is not something that the world was prepared for in a conventional war, at least. And whatever happened before this in Europe, after 1991, Europe saw a brief war with Georgia in 2008 when Russia annexed two regions of Georgia and declared them independent. These two regions were Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and Georgia still remains like that. And it was after 2008 when Ukraine was became a bit anxious about its own security, and eventually 2014 happened when Russia took away Crimea, and Crimea was obviously historically belonging to Russia, but according to the internationally recognized borders, it was a very much a Ukrainian territory. So 2014 was the second war in Europe, which again lasted for just a few days. But 2022 Ukraine is definitely different because, like I said, the whole world in some sense has gotten involved. Now, obviously, what makes it interesting, Adi, is the group of people, a group of countries like India that do not really want to take a stand there because they say that it's not really our war. Don't really push us for taking stands because we have equally good relations with both blocs, and it's not really our problem. I mean, why do you want to drag us into this? And no matter how much you want to look at the world in terms of bipolarity and geopolitical fractions, and we will talk about it as to what do I mean by it, but for sure there is a group of consequential hedgers, countries that are looking after their own strategic national interest first and not really wanting to get sucked into the sides, that are saying that we don't have much to do with it. And even if those countries do not represent the G7 type of an economy or an economic heft, these are the countries where the future lies. So these are the BRIC countries, these are the countries of the global south. Okay, so you can't really in a multipolar world not take their ideas or their stand seriously. So it is a really interesting time, because on the one hand what you see is a bit of a global bifurcation, like a geopolitical bifurcation of who's with the west and who's not with the west. And the very clear global bifurcation can be seen in terms of, there's a western alliance, west and G7 basically, in Europe, etc. And on the other hand is an alliance of, say, for example, Russia with North Korea and Iran, and of course China under China's backing, though China, has officially remained neutral, but still it's pretty much with Russia in many ways. Then there is a world which is marked by, a bit of a rivalry, or in fact, not a bit of a, but a very serious rivalry between US and China. Okay. Then there is a world which was just recovering from this unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic and all the supply side and the supply chain disruptions because of that. And we were in the middle of that recovery when the war started. Then there is also a war where the global south is on the rise. Okay, and of course I'm not even getting into the climate change issues, the energy transition, the clean energy, and all the space around emerging tech, the sensitive tech. So this is really a war, this is really a time of the world when things are really very ambivalent in many ways, and nobody can really come up with a one set of definition that can really define everything that is happening. And that adds to a lot of narrative, the richness of the narrative, but it also adds to the conundrum. Okay, when you're trying to arrive at answers. So yes, I think by and large, if I would like to conclude what I've been saying for the last 5 minutes, I would say that this really is a time of a geopolitical asymmetry, ambivalence, and a lot of conundrum.
Interesting way of putting it, actually. But one of the things I'd like to just ask you as a follow-up, you mentioned multipolarity and stuff like that. I don't want to take it up fully, but the main thing that I want to talk about is, have countries kind of realized, listen, dude, I mean, if I don't do this in this particular faction, I'm going to get hurt. So it's more of, for the lack of a better word, selfish way of dealing with things around the place. I mean, people are looking out for their own interests. And that seems to be the latest trend going forward as far as individual nation geopolitics is concerned. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. And I think no better example than India, right? Because what really has been our stand in the Ukraine war, right? We have just said that yes, we condemn war. Okay, this is not really the time for war. This is the official statement that we've always said. But we would not really like to sort of let taking sides actually sort of overshadow our national interests. So what we've been trying to tell the West, and by the way, if because I study so much of Europe and Europeans and I talk to them so much, when the war began, I think there was very little understanding within Europe about why India is not taking a stand or why is India neutral. There was very little understanding. And today, when I think about it in retrospect, I think it makes a lot of sense for our external affairs minister to go to Europe and say that Europe has to come out of this mindset that Europe's problems are world's problems, but world's problems are not Europe's problem. So there has been a bit of this, condescending tone and approach to the rest of the world from Europe. It's there. You can't deny that. Okay, for whatever reasons, a lot of historical reasons, the colonial things, etc. But it's been there. And very early on, when I used to participate in, say, conferences where Ukrainians were present or where East Europeans were present, they used to get very, I would say, upset about why India is not really taking a stand. You're a democracy, you want to be a global power, you want to be Vishwaguru, then why the hell are you not taking a stand? Can't you see that people are dying? And one of the things that we used to, I used to have a struggle in making them understand. I said, see, first of all, let me try to talk like an analyst. Okay, I mean, I'll try to be as objective about it as possible, and then I'll also talk as a human being, who has been in a country that has seen a lot of bloodshed and war. So the first thing is that from dry analysis itself, I think you will have a better understanding of our position when you will understand our security concerns. So the first lesson, Aadi, then, is that if you want to understand a conflict or the response to that conflict, you definitely have to contextualize it first. It's a very commonsensical takeaway, but a takeaway that is often overlooked because of these grand sweeping generalizations that unless and until you contextualize a conflict, you will not be able to understand A, what triggers it, and B, what responses it elicits. Okay, so that's one. So you have to take into account our security concerns. We have to unsettle borders, we have fought wars over them, etc., etc. We are a 1.4 billion people, etc. We use Russia for whatever. So that was the analyst in me speaking. And then I said, and by the way, even as a citizen of this country, I mean, we have seen wars. We have seen so many wars with Pakistan. We have seen wars with China. We have seen internal wars. We have seen terrorism. There is nothing that we have not seen. So don't try to, take this moral high ground about India is not understanding what bloodshed is all about, okay, or what violence, for instance, is all about. I said India does not talk from that standpoint. India talks from a standpoint of somebody, of a populace that has a very rightful experiential narrative, when it comes to what it means. When we have seen the partition, what is it that we have not seen, right? But having said that, if today as a country, we say that it is a war where we have very little to do, and we would like to not take sides, to keep away from it as much as possible, because we would like to believe in an issue-centric multi-alignment. Okay, that is what India stands for. And I think it's a very logical thing to do, because if you look at it from India's perspective, the world is not about USA and Europe or Russia. The war is about different power centers, right? And there's no denying that. Why do you think everybody's looking at Indo-Pacific? Why do you think everybody is wanting to engage the ASEAN countries? Why do you think there is a scramble for Africa afresh, right? I mean, you can't deny the fact that there is today a world which is, about multiple power centers. And what is India saying? India is saying that we would like to keep an issue-based multi-alignment, not a value, ideology-based, that kind of stuff, but issue-based multi-alignment, which is in tune with our multi-vector foreign policy. Because we actually reject an alliance worldview of the world. What we would instead do is try to have, based on our issues, we would try to engage with different power centers, which we have been doing in a rather, I would say, successful way. Okay, so there is a certain set of foreign policy objectives that we try to achieve through Russia, which is very clear. One, of course, is our defense equipment that we get from Russia. Of course, we are trying to indigenize, but that's a different story. I'll take it up later. The other is that, through Russia, we are trying to maintain or balance, China, because we as a country are in Asia, we are wary of a China-led Asian order, and we try to sort of use Russia to balance China. We use Russia to maintain our outreach to Central Asia, to Afghanistan, to Iran, the North-South Maritime Corridor, etc. And obviously, when we look at that side of our continental concern, that there is only China. I mean, there is only Russia that helps us. Okay, but this entire thing changes when we look at our maritime realities, which is jutting out in the Indo-Pacific, where we need a different set of countries because of what China has been doing there, and because we want to uphold a rule-based order, etc. We have the Quad, we have this, we have that. So I think this is a point that India has championed really well, because there has been a lot of formidable pressure on India to take sides, also because that we are holding the presidency of the G20 and the SCO at the same time in 2023. And this really throws up a bit of a challenge, on the Indian leadership to try and balance and straddle, these different power centers in a way which is meaningful. So we are not only doing it for food co-ops, okay? We are doing it because there is a certain agenda that we want to drive through it, okay? So what we are trying to tell everybody is that the G20 is not about what stand the G20 has on the war. Fine, the world is divided on the war. The G20 is about bettering economic architecture of the world, so that there could be less banking crisis, so that there can be better resilience, so that there can be better climate financing, so that there can be better, a more equitable distribution of say, for example, the special drawing rights, etc. So this is what the G20 is on. You cannot let the G20 agenda be hijacked by a geopolitical situation. The G20 is not equipped for that, right? So all I'm trying to tell you, Aadi, is that India, there is a bit of a responsibility on India's shoulders, because, we are not taking sides, but we are holding the G20 presidency, the SCO presidency, and the world is looking at us in a way that we can deliver. Okay, so when it comes to delivery, you are talking about trying to find convergences, trying to play this diplomatic game in a way that the common minimum program is not hijacked by, say, a war. does not mean that we don't get what a war is all about, So I think that is a kind of a conversation that is better now, because in this one long year, I think there has been a bit of a better understanding also in the West about what India stands for, and in India about what the Western concerns have been. So I think it's a bit of it's a good conversation. I mean, it's unfortunate that a war had to enable it, but like I always say at a lot of places, that the Ukraine war in many ways has enabled conversations that did not exist before. And it kind of throws open a wide array of foreign policy pathways, for us, because the world is changing and India is somewhere in the center of that change. So whether we like it or we don't, but there is a lot of expectation which is riding on our shoulders. Now we have to sort of do that, maintain our multi-alignment, and yet sort of emerge and retain our credibility as the voice of the global south. So it's a very interesting time, I would say, where you would see a lot of hedging, a lot of pushing, a lot of diplomatic maneuvering, but all of that to keep the national interest first. And it's not just a sectarian national interest, it's this collective national interest. I mean, I think I don't really just say it for the heck of it. I say it because yes, India truly has fought a lot of diplomatic battles everywhere for the sake of the collective national interest too. I mean, I don't know whether the viewers know about it or don't, but yes, it's quite a fact. It's not just rhetoric.
As a matter of fact, one of the things that we've spoken about on this channel is the over excessive selling of morality. And I personally termed it as morality being the latest version of colonialism. So that's something that we've discussed, and it's a hard statement, but yeah, of course. Uh, One thing that we've noticed is the perceived value of the United States as a partner, as an ally, reducing uh, because of, I don't know how to phrase it. I would say it an overbuilding of a narrative, and a very harsh cancel culture if you don't believe that narrative. And this was not to individuals, this was even to countries. The perception of US being a leader has kind of faded amongst the world. What do you think will be the implications of something like that?
Adi, well, so let's put it this way. You can't really be a world leader, for example, a hegemonic world leader, because real world politics is not about strategic altruism. It's never been about strategic altruism. It's always been about who has the power, who has the biggest military, who has the like the most formidable capabilities, right? Who dominates the world? It's hegemony, okay, through and through. And that has been, I think, the first and the last lesson of how international politics is done. So it is not about strategic altruism. But having said that, with the status of a hegemon comes a lot of secondary and tertiary personality traits, which so the soft power comes, the this expectation that builds up in people to see the leader taking the leadership, okay, when there's a problem, that all comes up. Actually, to be honest, I think what it started to happen was that America did not really process its unipolar moment in a way that could have been really fruitful for its foreign policy. So I think what started happening after 1991 was that America got involved into this rather strange pursuit of trying to paint the rest of the world in its own image of of free market and democracy, and getting into all these endless wars in the Middle East. Okay, so I personally feel that there's been a bit of a mismanagement of how to actually treat the fact that you are the unchallenged unipolar, moment. Okay, this is what you are today. So after 1991, because suddenly the Soviet Union collapsed, and that was it. That was the end of history. I'm sure you're aware of Francis Fukuyama's phrase. So coming back, I think in America there had been a lot of public opinion gearing in around the fact that we don't really need to burn our own fingers so much, okay, by getting involved in these endless wars. There is no Cold War anymore. We don't really need to do a Vietnam. Why are we getting, involved in all of this? And I think in a very easy manner, in a very simple manner, I think this is what reflects when you look at all these campaigns of making America great again, and America first. It is like that we really basically need to focus on ourselves. We don't really need to focus on others. So long story short, what has happened is that at the geopolitical level, I'm not getting into the economics of it and the domestic politics, but at a geopolitical level, you saw that the role of America as a global security provider started to shrink. And it started to shrink very, very noticeably under Trump. Okay. Not that it had not started to come earlier, or the decisions were not taken earlier, or there was not that brainstorming, but it started to become a very noticeable global phenomena under Trump, where you saw that America started retreating, from all these traditionally held places, for example, in the Middle East and in Syria and in Afghanistan and all of that. Now, with that came a vacuum. Okay. And with that came a vacuum, and you saw lot of other actors filling in that vacuum. China filled that vacuum in a different way. China had been filling that vacuum in different ways from a very long time, but with the American withdrawal, China became a huge stakeholder. Similarly for Russia, you look at how Russia kind of ousted, okay, the French and the Belgians and everyone, and the Wagner group kind of took control, there. And now today it is a problem for the European Union. So I think if I want to just sort of, declutter all that I've been saying, is that yes, with America's withdrawal from lots of these places, and I think the most embarrassing moment therein was the way in which America withdrew from Afghanistan. Okay, and that kind of really sort of pushed the world in a bit of a tizzy, because nobody really expected America to leave the way they did, right? I mean, that was the last thing on everybody's minds. But we all knew they would withdraw, but they would withdraw in this bit of leaving this chaos behind. Nobody sort of imagined that. So what it did was that it really did affect America's global, I would say, prestige, and all this, illusion that they had created after 1991 of being a power which was involved everywhere. But what it also did at a more dangerous level was it really somewhere convinced people like Vladimir Putin, President Putin, that he can actually wage a war and get away with it because America has retreated. Okay, the global economy is in doldrums. COVID-19 pandemic has kind of paralyzed the economic system of the world in many ways. Europe is dependent on Russia for its gas and its oil and everything, right? America is thinking about Indo-Pacific. They have already, withdrawn their commands from, for example, the Central Command has been withdrawn, and now it's been shifted to Pacific Command, etc. So it is just the right time. I can do it and get away with it, right? And that is where he made a bit of a miscalculation, because I think he did not factor in the reality that the CIA had been training the Ukrainian military and paramilitary forces for a long drawn insurgency against Russia after 2015 Crimea. So I think those were the miscalculations. So in many ways, America's withdrawal was not really totally understood by the global community and the world. And you see somebody like Vladimir Putin, who is, been such a high-ranking intelligence officer in Russia, making this miscalculation and then acting upon it and actually getting himself involved in a war where today he does not really have an exit strategy. So I think the way I would look at it is that, yes, I think the optics of America as a global leader did get really, I would say, damaged in many ways. But at the same time, it would be a very long drawn kind of a conclusion to perhaps say that there is any other leader today than America that can really sort of get involved into these wars and actually show in many ways that it means business. So I think if you look at how the Ukraine wars and the performance has, how it has helped Biden, is that if you look at a lot of debates, they say that Biden has been one of the most powerful American presidents, in a long, long time, because he has taken a decision, he has stood and he has acted upon it, and he's sustaining it. Okay, and he's sustaining it in a way which is perhaps the Ukrainian counteroffensive will show. A lot of enthusiasts will tell you that. I have my doubts on it, but then a lot of enthusiasts would perhaps say that now they are sending all the leopards and everything, and the way they have sort of garnered this European opinion and the European capabilities around the defense contact group and all of that, it's quite admirable, people would say. Then there's another side that would say that America is wasting its time, because it's not really the war in Ukraine that that really should matter to them. It should definitely be the Indo-Pacific, because that is where the American reputation actually is at stake. So if that happens, then that is going to be a major dent. But again, there are people, Adi, who would say that actually security does not really exist in silos. And today, the kind of a world we are in is basically about a security that is very indivisible. So security is along a continuum. It is not in silos. So the Euro-Atlantic security is not one silo, and the Indo-Pacific security is not the other silo. What they would argue is that there is an indivisible security. The way China and Russia are being thrown together, okay, speaks volumes of the fact that the security architectures are also merging. Therefore, the responses should also merge. So there is a lot of, that's why initially when I started talking about it, I said that there is really a lot of asymmetry, and no one really knows how it's going to emerge. Right, there are trends. We keep discussing about trends all the time, but if you ask me if there's a one final answer for all this, I would say that I'm not sure. I mean, it would be very unreasonable for me to actually say that, okay, this is the final answer. Nobody really knows about it. But what we definitely know is that we are entering into a world which is very different.
Indeed, there's no question about that. And uh, another counter narrative that would actually come across is the fact that uh, the Ukraine, I mean, as a matter of fact, we know for a while now, and if you go back into history with regards to the Afghan invasion of the Soviet Union, and you read uh, a comparative of what happened in Ukraine and how it started and how the Afghan invasion started, there's eerie similarities to that particular front. I read a paper written by the Yale University. I'll be happy to share it with you. It brought about a very different perspective, and I said there's a lot more to this game that we don't know with regards to anything else. But of course, yes, I mean, I personally don't support a war. There's just no reason for all this stuff. But I also don't support the fact that when negotiations were happening, we just, blew it up for whatever reason it was. The narratives itself have kind of been so intertwined with each other that, as you said, finding a simple, straight answer to things is just not possible. It's not possible. It's not relevant. It's not going to be able to be possible in the next 10, 15 years until unless the entire story comes out. I mean, even Afghanistan, you and I could have a debate for 2 hours and not realize what exactly happened in that place because a lot of it is not known. So as I was saying, there's just a whole lot of silos within which the information and the reality has actually come down to what is important. And you mentioned this in your previous answer is that for us to look at our own perspective and try and see what we can do about it. Because at the end of it, you can only play with the cards that you dealt, and you can't go beyond that. But having said that, there's something very 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 curious which a lot of people have spoken about today, at least openly. Previously it wasn't so. Europe wanted to actually go its own way, after Trump put that thing across that, yeah, I'm done with NATO, you guys do your own stuff. And they actually started thinking about it. Merkel had spoken about it, Macron has spoken about it, even Francois Hollande has spoken about it long time back. uh, there has been a little bit of a churn with regards to having an independent defense. And I'm going to go a little further ahead and say an independent foreign policy. Uh,
Hmm.
Something that the Europeans, I would say, had a restricted independent foreign policy. Why? Because a very senior member of the American administration sits in the European Union Council. So there's
Hmm.
obviously a amount of influence, and America is not one of those countries who will just sit quiet and, let things happen. Today, we see a Europe which is more or less dependent on America, uh, and they're starting to cry about it as well. So, how do you see that? Because Europe want,
Interesting.
yeah, wanted to have the leadership of the world, probably, you know, a peaceful leadership of the world. At least that's what they propagated. And today they're not. They'll have to change their entire narrative. How does that work?
Very interesting, Adi. In fact, I'm so glad you asked me this question. Only today, I wrote a column for the print where I talk about how the war has got Europe all the more dependent on NATO and the US, whereas they would have wanted to have more strategic autonomy. That's what they call it. And there is a bit of a background. So I'll tell you that, and here I can really tell you a lot of authentic narrative and experiences in Europe, because the European Union, for the first time after the war, has has been basically brainstorming about what their new security architecture should look like, because the old security architecture has been shredded to pieces with the war, the one that got into place after 1991. So they call it the post-Cold War, world order, or the European order. That has now gone down the drain, and Europe is worried about their security. And for the first time after the war, they have come up with their own flagship, security forum. Okay, and it is under the aegis of the European External Action Service, the EEAS, which you can perhaps understand as the foreign policy or the foreign, affairs department of the EU. And the first the first edition of that security dialogue was held in Brussels on the 20th and 21st of March, and I went to European Parliament from India, so I can definitely tell you what was happening in that room and what the mood was like, and what really are Europeans doing about their crisis today. So the first thing, in short, of course, there is an understanding, there is a backdrop in Europe that what they are facing is a poly crisis. So it's not just the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is perhaps best understood as the precipitating factor. Right? It is the precipitating factor. Why? I mean, everything is pegged at the war in Ukraine. But to say that had there been no war in Ukraine, would it still be a very easy world to live in? No. We are living in an era, the Europeans understand it. They refer to it as poly crisis or perma crisis, which is like permanent crisis, a situation where there's permanent crisis. There is energy crisis. There is a push to make transition to greener energy soon. There is all this hullabaloo around emerging tech and the lack of norms around emerging tech, and artificial intelligence, climate change, what is happening in the oceans, the maritime domain ability, capabilities, the space situational awareness capabilities, the hybrid threat. So basically, there is an understanding that there's a background of a war which is in disarray, number one. To add to that, they have something as humongous as the Ukraine war, right? So what are they doing about their security? Two things quickly. First is that the Europeans say that what we understand from this particular thing is that we cannot defend ourselves without NATO. So we have been a bloc, that has not really been able to translate its geo-economic heft into geopolitical traction. You understand? So European Union, okay, has not been able to translate all the economic heft they have in the world into any significant geopolitical traction, because they are basically pushed around, by the US and the China and the Russia. So that's what. So that realization is there. So on the one hand, like you said, that all this talk about NATO becoming irrelevant, NATO becoming insignificant because Macron wanted to give a more independent direction to European Union, all that has gone out of the window, because they realized that, what about basic existence? You have to have NATO, number one. Okay, so so they do talk about collaboration with the UN. They do talk about collaboration with, they have something called the CSDP, the Common Security and Defense Policy Mission. So they have about 20 CSDP missions running in the world. But all that is fine. I mean, the most pronounced is the vertical, where they say that there has been and there will be a deepening of engagement with NATO and the US. So that's not going away anywhere. In fact, it has come back in the most pronounced way possible, number one. But number two, and where they go a little bit ahead, is that they say that that is just the half side, or just the half bit, of the story. How we intend to complete it, or how we intend to make it more holistic, is that we want to also emerge as a global security provider. Now, when we say security, they say that we understand that we can't overnight become a military security provider, right? I mean, we don't really have those capabilities. If at all we had those capabilities, we would first send them to Ukraine. They say that, okay, very, very clearly. What we intend to do, Europe says, is that we want to emerge as a global security provider, because security itself has become very comprehensive. Okay, so they say that we have certain tools by which we want to forge better partnerships all over the world. And I was very struck by the fact that the High Representative there, Joseph Borrell, he made it very clear again and again that he wants the partnerships to be equal, pragmatic, flexible, humble. Okay, so this is a different Europe talking, today, and they want to reach out to the world. Of course, they have certain tools. They have something called a European Peace Facility, and the European Peace Facility is a kind of an off budget instrument that they kind of created in a special manner. Then they committed a lot of money to it, and right now what they're doing is that they are helping Ukraine with it. Okay, but they are saying that it's not only for Ukraine; it's a global instrument. So we want to now we want to adopt other instruments of similar kinds for Somalia, for Niger, basically again in Africa, because they want to fight the Wagner group there. Okay, so European Peace Facility is one of those ways. Then there are other ways. They have come up with a hybrid toolbox, okay, to tackle the hybrid threats in the world, and in ways which was very unprecedented. Similarly, the European Union has come up with a latest space strategy where they are trying to build on capabilities that they can have better governance in space, because protecting space assets is something which is very very crucial. Okay, and they are very very aware of what China is doing in space. Similarly, they have something called a coordinated maritime presence for the maritime space. So what I'm saying is that, to cut a long story short, because I'm sure not everybody here who's listening to us is a Europe expert, and they just get very mentally tired with all these unending names. But what I want to basically state is that dependence on NATO is not going anywhere. In fact, it is only deepening. So they've had, even as I mean, in January, in February, they've had agreements with NATO that has taken the partnership to the next level already. Then also understand that the overlapping membership has also been increasing, Adi. What do I mean when I say overlapping membership? So you know that Sweden and Finland, that were neutral for the last so many decades, have now joined the NATO. Finland has already done it. The flag is already on, but Sweden will join in a couple of months. I mean, it's just about some more hurdles. I would say the last hurdles from Hungary and maybe from Turkey. But I think that's really settled because they have had their mechanisms to settle it. So there has been an unprecedented enlargement of NATO, right? There is Denmark, which is a NATO member, which is now getting involved with the CSDP missions in the EU. So there has been an overlap in membership. There has been an increase in that, and they've had administrative agreements. They've had a lot of partnerships in January and February this year that has taken this deepening to the next level. So that leg is not going anywhere. In fact, it has only become more important. It has been bolstered like never before. The good part is that EU understands that this is not going to solve the problem, okay? Because if they wish to have any geopolitical traction, okay, if they want to convert their economic heft, their geo-economic heft into some geopolitical traction in a significant enough way, then they have to forge meaningful defense and security partnerships. And that is what they're doing. And they have different toolboxes for it. Now, the question is, are these two things? So EU would say that these two are basically complementary. I would argue, and a lot of people who look at it from outside would argue, that these cannot really be complementary in a way, in a picture perfect way, because end of the day you are talking about a dependence and independence at the same time. It is bound to clash. Okay, so I think only time will tell how this arrangement is going to play out. For now, I think that they have started out with something. For the first time, European Union is having a defense and a security dialogue, which is really unprecedented. That they have started to produce ammunition is really unprecedented. They have, the 27 member countries of the EU have reached a consensus in February to actually give Ukraine 1 million rounds of ammunition, 155 mm. It's unprecedented. Nobody would have thought about it, until last year. So all this is unprecedented, but where is it going? This is an answer for which I would say, let's wait and watch, because these things are bound to clash. You cannot have a quest for strategic autonomy and a deepening of dependence at the same time. There will come a time when these things are bound to clash. I do not think that they can go on in a parallel manner in the way that EU thinks it can. Okay, I'm sure they are aware of their own shortcomings far better than we are, but they would like to present this picture. Let us take it on face value because they're starting out with it. But I think, because I work on it so much, I think that this dependence on NATO is actually going to come in the way of Europe's strategic autonomy, a goal that they should have. Because come on, how can a group of 27 countries only have economic policy and no foreign policy, no security policy? How is it even possible? So there is something which is really discordant about this idea. Okay. And what Europe is facing today is part of that, that unfinished project of what they should have been. They should have had an economic policy, because see, let's face it, they cannot thrive on the peace dividend anymore. It's gone. Those days are gone. So I think they are, like I say, I call it, Europe's reawakening of sorts. And I say it for a reason, because I mean, I argue that this is going to be seen in different sectors. It is going to be seen across sectors. It's not just security, just economy. They are changing in many ways. And then you can argue that they are changing, but then what really does that change mean? So, for example, I mean, I'll just give you a very interesting example. So, Europe has now sort of cut off its economic ties with Russia. Okay. But they still have to trade, right? So now they're looking at China. They always had a trade with China. The trade was very high. It was like 500 600 billion dollars in a year. And China, of course, also needs the trade. But so Macron, so French President Macron and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen are on a trip to China. But just before embarking on the trip, Ursula von der Leyen came out with a new China strategy. What is a new China strategy? So she said that, okay, we want to do trade with you, but at the same time, we want to de-risk that trade. All right, what does it mean? Not much, because when Macron went there, whatever he saw, analysts started saying that, okay, so here is the EU Commission president who's trying to de-risk it with China, and here is Macron who's trying to re-risk it with China. So, I think there is a lot of semantic rhetoric, confusion about what really do terms, words, definitions, all these labels mean. And only time will tell where they're going. But for one thing that I can be sure of is that the European Union and the 27 states out there are clear on at least this one thing, that they want trade with China. So as long as China is making the toys and China is making, whatever, all these, the toys and the bartan and the khilonas and all of that, it's okay. They want to really watch China where? In sensitive tech. So 5G, sensitive tech, Huawei, they are very careful. Other things, they understand they need trade, of course. So those things, but these are very amorphous markers. These are huge markers. How do they really translate in trade deals? How do they really translate into on things on the ground? Only time can tell. Because on the one hand, Europe says that we do not want the comprehensive trade and investment deal with China. It has been on a hold for a long time and it's still on hold. But on the other hand, you see that the human rights dialogue has resumed. Okay, so the mechanism is back in place. So there are things, there is something, but you will find a contradiction to it. And then you will find something else and you'll find another contradiction to it. So, like I say, that Europe is actually undergoing a bit of an identity crisis. Okay, and they will take some time for the debris to settle. Before we jump on conclusions about what Europe is going to look like, I think we should sort of wait for that debris to settle. The Europeans themselves say that the good part is that they understand that what they're going through is not something normal. And they say that we are at the cusp, we are at an inflection point of something new. But for sure, whatever Europe we see tomorrow is going to be different from the Europe there was earlier. They say that. I would say, let's wait and watch.
I, the only observation that I would, and this is as a layman, I've rarely seen a European leader talk about issues of inflation, issues of unemployment, issues of refugees, issues of um, their slowing economy, issues of trade. When it comes to China, of course, they talk about trade, but the predominance of the discussion and the overpowering use of Ukraine for achieving a certain foreign policy goal with regards to may it be for India, may it be for any other country in the world, for example, Africa. I mean, Macron had a terrible visit to Africa. uh, he got called out pretty badly. That to me somehow hints to a certain factor that the understanding of the factor that they're digging themselves into a hole while standing inside the hole, they're digging themselves deeper, is somewhere not there. I mean, 6 countries have lost governments. Um, You mentioned something about over dependence, and let's put this as the final one. I think I wanted to discuss China and India with you as well, but I think I'm going to keep that a little away because this is a little more interesting. We'll probably come back for an episode again and talk about that. This is a bit interesting because is there an understanding within Europe that the world doesn't want to listen to Ukraine all the time? You don't want the European president, sorry, but to come across on the stage and every third word is Ukraine. And there is a huge amount of opposition within the European Parliament for that as well. People have called her out. People have this and that. France is going through terrible protests. Germany is going through it. Spain, there's a big problem. The Dutch were up in arms. Polish tractors are up in arms right now. As a matter of fact, Zelensky had to cancel a visit to Poland because they're so against their participation in the war. This is something I'm not able to understand. The people are not for it.
Adi, the way I understand it, see, nobody wants a war, and definitely nobody understands it, and nobody understands it better than the person on the street. Okay, because the war is really detrimental to a common person like you and me. Common people, our children who go to school, who get nobody wants them to be bombed and the hospitals to be and all of that. So I think there is a bit of a problem when it comes to understanding why the war is happening. Like I keep telling to a lot of people here is that, so the fact that we are neutral in the war is because of our foreign policy orientation and our national interest. So, for example, the way we chase our national interest, the way we see our national interest in the world, and all that. But it does not still explain why there is a war in Europe. Okay, so without getting into too much of a nitty gritty, all I can perhaps tell you is that, see, after 1991, this is not the first war in Europe. I mean, like a big war. Okay, so in 2008 there was a war. I told you about Georgia. Nothing really happened because nobody wanted to disturb that, that golden balance of a lot of trade and a lot of gas, and in a very cheap manner through all the pipelines and all that, and nobody wanted to disturb that. And France and Germany had really played a major role in basically building these ties, and especially the economic ties between Russia and mainland Europe. So nobody wanted to disturb that. Nothing really happened. Georgia just lost territory. Okay, that's all, and it's still like that. Georgia's territory is still lost. Georgia still has, two regions which have declared themselves independent and act as independent states. And there are certain countries in the world, like of course Russia and Venezuela and a few more, that recognize it. Other countries don't. A similar thing happened in 2014, and still there was no war. Okay, because everybody thought of it, it was a swift war, and nobody thought of it enough to trigger a major reshuffle in Europe, or a major it was not really enough to bring the house down. Okay, let's put it that way. But there was, and after 2014, you would see that from the European leaders themselves, a lot of diplomatic maneuvering started, a lot of diplomatic effort started to try and not have another war. And the best those diplomatic efforts can be, can be crystallized into, is the Normandy format talks and the Minsk agreements that you may have heard before, somewhere. So basically, it is about how to deal with the Ukrainian situation and all of that. Now, alongside all this, there was, after 1991, a lot of other memorandums of understandings, and a lot of other, detailed say written promises between US, between mainland Europe, between Ukraine and Russia, that Ukraine's territorial integrity will be protected. It will be, it will, the borders will be protected, etc., etc. But actually, 2008 and onwards, Russia really changed its foreign policy. I mean, there is no denying it. And Russia started doing things that really made its neighbors extremely wary. Okay, and there is a reason, because in India, the typical understanding of why the war is happening is that NATO pushed eastwards, and that was a security concern for Russia, and Russia kind of pushed back. If you really go and see what happened in Europe, it's not really that kind of a monolithic argument, because NATO can't really push eastward on its own. NATO was not asking these countries to come and join NATO, because the countries that got independent after 1991, the ex-Warsaw Pact countries, the ex-Soviet Constellation countries, were constantly worried about their security, Adi. Okay, and that is, you go, you talk to them, you go, you read their history, you go read their political debates around it. You will see that all these countries, they formed, because they were small countries, they formed small groupings. And I can tell you the name of the two most well-known groupings. One is called the Visegrad Group, and the other is called the GUAM Group. It's GWAM. And these countries got together and lobbied for years to get into NATO and European Union, because for them, affluence, economic affluence, future security, all of that sort of West guaranteed that, whereas they were constantly worried about Russia. And their fears stood vindicated when Russia actually waged a war in 2008 and then repeated it in 2014. What you see in Ukraine in 2022 is the third time it is happening. So if you go and talk to the Europeans, they would say that if we don't do anything about it in a decisive enough manner this time, everything else will be will go down the drain. And they have a point there. Okay. Now the thing is that how far are you willing to go? And that is where I think the problem lies, Dadi, because the sentiment in Europe is that, okay, till now, Ukraine was a buffer zone, but the way things are going, we want to make Ukraine our shield. So a buffer zone can be weak, but a shield needs to be strong. And for example, if you talk to any defense minister in mainland, Europe, and defense minister of Sweden or whoever, there were a whole bevy of defense ministers there. They would say that supporting Ukraine is not just the right thing to do; it's also the smart thing to do, because by supporting Ukraine, we are actually guaranteeing support security to ourselves. That is how the way they look at it. Where I think they go wrong, or they go overboard. Not wrong. Let me not sound condescending. Where they go overboard is where they say that they are going to support Ukraine as long as it takes. What do you mean as long as it takes? Are you willing to push the world into to a nuclear war? What are you saying? But if you look, if you ask the Europeans, if you ask about this particular factor, they are of the opinion that nuclear weapons will not be used, because if President Putin wanted to use nuclear weapons, he would already have used it by now. And one of the reasons why he doesn't use it, because he doesn't want to lose out on the support from China. And China has made it very clear that no nukes, because that is not a world that China wants, because China has economic interests. Now, the thing is that I know the merit of this argument, I understand. But end of the day, you are still talking about a possibility. What if he does, right? Are you prepared for that eventuality? I think that is where they go a bit overboard about supporting Ukraine. But to sort of argue that they are supporting Ukraine for nothing, I don't think that's the case, because they are also facing a lot of economic pain because of all this diversification that they had to do. Okay, so it's not really come for free. There are no free lunches. So the fact that NATO is providing for the security is not the only thing. European Union, despite all of the things that you mentioned, people are out on the streets in France and Spain and all of that. Still, they have sent billions of aids of package, to Ukraine. Now they are sending ammunition. So I don't think that one should, here sitting in India, assume that they do not understand what is happening. They do it because they genuinely consider it a big enough security threat. Number one. Number two, like I think anybody reasonable enough would argue, is that okay? So what are the contours of where this is going? Right? You must have some sort of a contours, right? I mean, how do you how do you plan to go? What is the plan? Okay. Long story short, in many ways, I feel that 2023 is where West feels that they have the best shot at trying to bring about a decisive turn to a war. I don't think anybody is talking about winning or losing clearly. I think the way the war is going, what the West is doing, and in the same way what Russia is doing, is to try to bring it to a level where you can talk from an advantage, from a position of strength, so that so nobody is saying that there will never be talks. Okay, the problem is that right now there can't be talks because the Russian peace plan and the Ukrainian peace plan are completely incommensurate. Okay, there's no way you can have a talk there, because those four regions that Russia annexed and called it Russian. So now that's belonging to the Russian Federation, and according to the law, you can't really have a talk about land which is of the Russian Federation. And Ukraine say, but that's not the international recognized boundaries of Ukraine. Now that is what, and that is why, if you see, and that's another point, I think a very valid point that I need to make. That is why if you see that everybody's efforts about bringing the war to an end have failed. Okay, you can't bring the war to an end. That kind of mediation will not work. What will work, on the contrary, in this kind of a very complex situation, Adi, is a limited mediation strategy. Like, for example, a very good example can be given from how Turkey and the UN mediated around the grain corridors. If you remember, because the Black Sea, there was a siege on the Black Sea, and they kind of mediated with Ukraine and with Russia and got into, allowing this passage for export of grains to arrive at the Wana or the MENA region, whichever way you want to put it, the West Asia and North Africa region. So why was that successful is because it was about a specific issue, and you were mediating just around that issue so that you could have some success. But if you want to sort of bring about an end to a war and say that I have enough I mean, how do I put? I mean, I have good relations and enough good relations to bring the war to an end. Nobody. It's China has not been able to do it. India has not been able to do it. Turkey, Israel. The list is endless. Pope also tried, by the way. Okay, Uncle Pope also tried. He also failed. So the point is that no. But where it is going is that everybody understands like a clear victory and defeat is not really where things are going. Where things are going is that you reach a point of relative strength so that you can negotiate in a manner which is favorable to you. So there will be negotiations. The jhagda is the ladai, the struggle is who gets there first, so that you have a relative sort of say a position of strength for having that negotiation. So that is where the war in Europe is going. I hope either side reaches that point so that we can bring the war to an end. But right now there won't be any end. The Ukrainian side is preparing for a counter offensive. There has been a fresh round of conscription in Russia. So things are really heated up right now. And in my opinion, the counteroffensive should come in a few weeks. I think that's my reading. And they have never been better prepared, to be honest, because, these are the times when you would see the best, I mean, the Leopard tanks and the HIMARS and everything. They have all of that, even though not long range, but whatever range they want. So they have middle range, HIMARS, etc., 70 kilometers. They have ammunition. They have all of that. But my only misgiving there is that how far can you just go on supporting Ukraine? Okay, if it doesn't happen in 2023, then do you have a plan chalked out for 2024? If you don't have a plan chalked out for 2024, why the hell are you, putting all of this at stake? I mean, don't you see there are people out on the streets? So there is this tension. Okay, there is undeniable tension out there in Europe, and that is why I say that there is a lot of debris, in Europe. And by the way, people, for example, and what is the problem with Europe? One of the biggest problems with Europe is that they are all aging. Okay, no matter how much incentives they give to women for having children, they are not, and they are dependent on immigrants. And the immigrants come and they kind of change the lifestyle and the order and the European whatever, and then they are angry. But end of the day, they are not really. They are an aging population. Okay, and the for example, the protests in France were pretty much to do with the pension and the pension reforms, etc. And Macron wanted to increase the age. And do other reforms, and people came out on the streets because the way which he did it was wrong. But there is also a war fatigue. Let's face it. I sensed it. So it's a good thing to say that fine, we want to support Ukraine, but then end of the day, it's all taxpayers' money. Okay. And the price of commodities has been going up. There is a lot of inflation. The economic troubles are getting expressed in ways like so it becomes very unsustainable in Europe to run businesses, and because of the unsustainable prices of energy, etc. So what they're doing is that now they need to shift the bases out. And where are they shifting it? The first place is China. So all the big German companies are shifting their industrial bases to China. So it's a circular logic, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you want to de-risk China, you want to do this and you want to do that, you want to you want to sort of not push Russia too much into China's lap, and then you want China to take a stand, but at the same time, you are also in many ways empowering China. So that's why I say that there is debris. Okay, now very quickly, where does India, figure in all this? I think that there are certain key takeaways for India. The first thing is the lesson about dependencies. Okay, so we were dependent on the Soviet, from the Soviet times to until now, we were dependent on Russia for our defense equipments. And I think that was not really a good strategy. It is less to do with the fact of whether Russia is a friend or not, or how far can Russia remain a friend. It is more to do with the fact that you cannot really be a kind of a military that we are, and at least we aspire to be, with exports and imports. I mean, we can't really rely on imports. So we have to increase the degree of indigenization. The government has come up with a lot of, especially the MOD. I work for MOD. I know it very, very well. We have had very concrete defense acquisition procedure reforms and indigenization and all the joint ventures. So there is a lot of awareness, and the awareness that has not started from the war, Adi. The awareness was there. The war has tried, kind of accelerated it in that direction. Number one. Number two, we need to really enforce our multi-alignment. And when I say multi-alignment, I think there's one thing that I want everybody to know is that when India says that we have an issue-based multi-alignment, which in simple language would perhaps mean that we have a multi-vector foreign policy. We would like to engage with all blocks, but at the same time it does not mean by definition that it is an equal distribution. Okay, so our multi-alignment, it does not mean equal distribution. It's the issues. When we say multi-alignment, which is issue based, there is a hierarchy of issues. Okay, so and the way the world is going, we would be forced to grapple with the changes. So for example, one of the key arguments for India from the war is that regardless of whether Russia wins or loses the war, it is going to emerge a diminished power, not only because of the way it's been bled all these couple of years, also because of the sanctions. And in that situation, it is going to get further pushed into China's lap, which is a situation that India never wanted. That it is not up to it. I mean, that is a situation which is not good for India's strategic calculus. So what do we do? I think what we need to do is that we need to be open to a lot of security challenges, and that merging of the security theater that is that is happening, that is underway. It is unavoidable. It is going to happen, and one of the ways in which it will express itself, I can give you a clear example, is that, for example, if you've noticed that an alliance like the NATO is pivoting to Asia, what does it mean? Okay, does it mean that it is looking for members? I don't think it's looking for members. It would be very, very outlandish to imagine it's looking for members in Asia. What it is doing is that, and if you ask the NATO people, what they say is that basically we are pivoting to Asia because we understand that China is a major threat and the security environment is changing. And the security environment is changing, that we need to co-design norms around artificial intelligence, around hybrid security threats, around sensitive tech, etc. We need to develop better MDA capabilities. We need to develop better SSA capabilities, space situational awareness capabilities. We need to have some better intelligence sharing, etc., etc. There's already a Five Eyes which is working in the Indo-Pacific. I think you know about it, apart from Quad. Okay, so the larger point is that there is a bit of a security domain which is not yet explored well enough. And if there are certain conversations that make us better equipped to grapple with those security changes, we should try to not miss that bus. Okay, it is not about, I think, end of the day, right, like I said, that there is no one set of definitions which is going to really explain what is going to happen in the world, and we need to keep our eyes and ears open. Okay, and especially for a country which merits itself on say multi-alignment and issue-based multi-alignment, that is where the key lies, that India should really be open to what issue is there on the table, not where that issue is coming from. Okay, so I think that is a key takeaway from India. And I think India so far has been doing a decent enough job, right, about it. I mean, we have our own limitations, but yeah, our relations with the West has actually never been better in many ways. There has been a lot of, trade relations, defense relations, a lot of strategic cooperation that has expanded and deepened with the West, with the US, with Europe. But at the same time, we have never before emerged more forcefully as the voice of the global South. So coming to the same thing that I started out my interaction with. But yes, like I said, I think India needs to keep in mind that let's focus at the issue at hand, and not where and which block is that coming from. I don't think India really bothers so much about the block politics and all of that. That's
Absolutely.
really the
Absolutely.
past.
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for taking out the time. I'd want to actually continue this conversation, especially about Europe. There are so many things that are there, and you're a Europe-centric person, so I'd like to actually invite you formally on the show as well for another nice conversation on Europe specifically. There's too many narratives coming out of there that we need to understand, and too many pole positions that have been taken that probably are going to impact a lot of things around the world. But for this one, I'd like to thank you, and hope to see you back again for another interesting episode, another interesting conversation. Till then, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, Adi. It was a pleasure joining you. Bye.
Thank you.